You cannot separate community and school safety from each other. They go hand in hand. We've seen adults displaying lack of impulse control in airplanes, and as kids go back to school, we cannot underestimate the challenges that may arise. It's important to be prepared to know how to respond. Jason is the Director of School Safety and Security for the Charles County Public Schools. He is responsible for sustaining a safe learning and work environment for over 27,000 students and nearly 4,000 staff members. He is a retired police commander with over 24 years in law enforcement. I'm your host, Chris Parker, and this is the Easy Pay Podcast. Jason, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Pay Podcast today.
Oh, it's an honor to be here. Thank you for the invite.
You're welcome. Can you give us a little background about who you are and what you do?
My name is Jason Stoddard. I'm the Director of School Safety and Security for the Charles County Public Schools. We're located about 25 minutes south of Washington, D.C. We have about 28,000 students spread across 39 buildings, and we're the 9th largest school system in the state of Maryland.
That is a large group of students that you're responsible for.
It definitely keeps me busy.
So I wanted to we'll talk a bit about school safety, security, and kind of how those things overlap. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you run across in terms of school safety and keeping your kids safe?
So one of the biggest challenges in school safety in general is the fact that every person has spent 12, 13, 14 years in a public school. So everybody has experience on a day-to-day basis for many, many years, especially their formative life, of what schools are and and their own opinions of how to keep kids safe, and their own reference points. So, if you were in school in the 90s, smoking in the bathrooms was a huge deal. Fast Times at Ridgemont High, that's your place that you remember. The antiquated terms of the stoners and the jocks, that's where you remember school being. Physical altercations occurring, and then it was over with and people were done. Now in 2021, in the 21st century, those things have changed. The number of threats that we face have changed. School shootings have been around since, say, the 17, 1800s. However, they really became on a hot point of contention in 1999 post-Columbine. And now we're seeing Columbine kids that are having kids. So the reference points are different. It's much like being in for the private sector. You have multiple generations of employees. We have multiple generations of people who are having kids that have multiple understandings of what schools are and how you keep them safe. Not until 3 years ago was anybody worried about ransomware attacks, cyber issues inside of our schools. And now you're seeing it being a very lucrative business for cyber terrorist organizations to take over data. We had a local school district here near the National Capital Region that paid $7 million to get a portion of their data back. People don't see that as being part of school safety. They see the terminal event of active shooter as being the only thing. They don't necessarily see the whole scope of what school safety is and school security is, and keeping all of your babies safe.
Yeah. So have you, when it comes to the physical safety, I'm out here in Southern California where there's been probably more of gang violence in schools over the years. Obviously, when I was in school, it was the biggest thing that ever happened on campus was someone smoking in the bathrooms, and there was the occasional fight, which you get suspended for 2 days, then everything's back to normal. LA County definitely a more prominent type of gang activity on campus. What are kind of the points of where students and teachers and faculty and staff can help the kids stay safe, and what are kind of the warning signs that they should be watching for?
So, you touch on, to build upon your point, community issues are school issues and school issues are community issues. The old adage of, it takes a village to raise a child is very true. It's just as true today in the 21st century and in 2021 as it was 20, 30 years ago. And probably more so today because of how worldly kids are so much younger. Mm-hmm. And I think government works best when it's collaborative. Right. So school issues are for far too long have been seen in silos. Yeah, that's a school issue.
Yeah.
It's not a government issue. It's not a Department of Social Services issue. It's a school issue. Well, all of those issues intertwine with each other. And if we're all not sitting at the same table with the same goal in mind, which is to make sure that we are raising the future leaders of tomorrow and to educate our students so that they can be competitive in a global world, we lose the ability to do that without that collaboration across sections. One of the things that I'm super proud of inside of our school district is we hold an all-hazard work group meeting where I'll bring 30 different organizations to a table once a quarter prior to COVID. And we've had representatives, and that was born out of some of the active shooter and tragedy events that I've responded to, where you have an active shooter at a school or a shooting at a school or at the Navy Yard or someplace else, and all of these government agencies respond. And I don't want them to see me for the first time during the middle of a tragedy. I want them to walk up to me and say, Jason, what do you need? And I want to look at them and say, Chris, what do you need? So building those relationships beforehand, and then understanding that not only do we need to look at those terminal events such as an active shooter, but we also need to look at gang violence. We need to look at how we're sharing data on poverty inside of our communities because it directly affects our discipline. We hear a lot about disproportionality. Disproportionality is based upon the idea that everything's equal, and we know it's not. We absolutely know poverty affects certain demographics much more than it does others. Mental health care affects certain demographics more than it does, or the lack of mental health care, the lack of hospitals, the food deserts, the inability of kids to get good food. They can go into a local store and buy a beer cheaper than you can a water. Buy a bag of Fritos, but no apples. Those are all issues that a school plays an integral role in, but for far too long, we've been siloed off from it. So the warning signs come from every direction that we can. Our all-hazard work group, while it was born out of a terminal event and structured for a terminal event, we've now expanded it to include church groups, the American Red Cross, UNICEF, everything that we can bring to bear to talk about how do we keep our kids safe, because it's all intertwined. Mm-hmm. And it takes everybody coming to the table. One of the things that Maryland was the second state to start. It started in West Virginia as a program called Handle with Care, where we partner with, and Handle with Care was built on police officers, but we've expanded it to include police, fire, EMS, and the Department of Social Services in our hospitals, that when they have a child that comes in that's suffered from a traumatic event or a tragedy or is a witness to it, that they send us a quick note that just says, hey, this kid, if they know the school, they let us know the school. If not, we can find it in our databases. Handle them with care. We don't ask any details about the event or anything else that's going on, but we know that kid suffered something shortly before school or the day before school or something along those lines. They may not be ready to take that spelling test because the SWAT team busted through their door at 6 o'clock that morning. They're probably not in the right frame of mind to take a spelling test. They need to talk to somebody. But that allows us to use those warning signs and to build those databases for those families that need extra help, that need us to come to the table with and be a partner in teaching them how to fish, not just giving them the fish all the time.
Yeah. And I assume that enables your staff to have kind of that, I'm missing the word off the tip of my tongue, but have that little extra compassion for a student who has had a traumatic event within the last 24, 48 hours, kind of knowing that if they're somewhat maybe more animated in class, not to, escalate, but to have kind of those de-escalating interactions.
Absolutely. When you look at, we had our phrase, our catchphrase a couple of years ago was to be kind. Just the simpleness of being kind to people, which drives you into that conversation of empathy. And teaching teaching kids is easy. Teaching adults is hard. And getting to adults that you need to be empathetic, that not every kid has the same experiences that you do, that we have to take into account social and emotional standpoints of the children before we learn. You have to build a relationship with them so that they see you not just as the authoritative teacher, that they see you as a partner in their learning. One of the real big things that we're really pushing home to our staff is, instead of saying what's wrong with you, asking kids what happened to you. Mm-hmm. And that is a mantra that I think just tells everybody, not only from a school standpoint, but think about it from a professional standpoint, from a work standpoint. Instead of as the boss, as the supervisor, as the aspiring leader, as the manager, asking what's wrong with you, why do you behave this way, asking what happened to you, and that really changes that conversation point. And especially when you're dealing with the littlest of learners, we lose kids the ramification for losing a child in second grade to education because of problems is compounded not only by the fact that we're adding more people that are dropouts to the world, but we know that when they drop out, they're like 14 times more likely to go to prison, that they're not going to be productive members of society. So it's incumbent upon schools to do their portion of that role, to support kids in the learning, which again falls right back into that cascading effect of the safety and security inside of our schools, because we know statistically kids that are doing well in school, that are engaged in school, we know that kids that are athletes, that kids that keep themselves busy are far less likely to be threats inside of the school, idle hands theory, and they have a goal, they have light at the end of the tunnel, and that's where we want to keep them.
Do you find that you have, like, because we were talking about a little bit of that kind of that generational, we've had 3 or 4 generations going through 12 years of school. Do you find difficulty in communicating with the parents of shifting issues because they're thinking about, well, when I went to high school or when I went through K through 12, these were the issues, and now there's a different set of issues, so there's a little mismatch on there expectations?
Yeah, I think there is, and it's up to us. We can never over communicate, right? What's going on, and I think all of us. It's incumbent upon all of us that are in this profession to make sure that we're having honest conversations with people about all the different threats that we face, about all the different things that are going on, about changing technologies that can make life safer, but at the same time can make it more accessible to information. And we do. Generational poverty is an issue that we play a role in ending, not only from the end part, from the means, from the educating kids so that they can go on to college and make a good living, but also from what can we support, whether it's through our pupil personnel worker program, where we send out jackets and we help people with food. And during the COVID pandemic, some of the things that we've been doing, feeding our community. We've served over like 1.5 million meals since the COVID community, since the beginning of COVID, whatever we do as a portion of that is helpful all the way across the line. And being willing to have those tough conversations. It's real difficult to have tough conversations family wise. Imagine having tough conversations from our point of view. But for far too long, I think we've shied away from it. We didn't want to offend anybody, or we didn't want to have those tough conversations. And frankly, if the statistics are the statistics, if a kid has a teenage pregnancy, their chances of being a successful adult are reduced. It by all means doesn't mean that it doesn't happen, but it's reduced. If a child is introduced into the criminal justice system early on in their life, the statistics bear out that being a successful adult and graduating high school and moving on to college or a trade school and doing those things is greatly reduced. So, and in many cases, when you can hold up that mirror to the parent and say, see, we told you we were here to help you and you didn't take it. And now we're here talking about your kid. And we have to be willing to have those conversations at times in a professional way, because we live in two worlds. But the rich or the richer or the more powerful, and the people who have nothing, or the people that we need to help. The middle class is shrinking every day, and the only way that we change that is through education and through local governments and big governments. I won't even address the federal government, but working collaboratively to come up with solutions, not just rhetoric.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the kind of collaborative solutions that you've tried to use for addressing, let's say, like gang violence in the school?
So Maryland passed a law years ago that required police to actually tell us about people who are arrested in the community for a certain group of crimes. That doesn't happen very often across the state because it's kind of a forgotten law. And policing is death by 1,000 cuts. I spent a little over 20 years there. And you started in 1998. Policing didn't look anywhere near it did in 2018. And it became, first started with traffic stop data. You got to collect it. So you wrote the ticket, but the ticket wasn't good enough. So now you had to do this piece of paper. Now you had to do this because we were looking at documenting all kinds of things. When we start to talk about issues of collaboration, we have to figure out what best works. And one of the things that works for us is this idea that when the police arrest a child, whether it's in school or out of school, that could affect the safety, they're required by law to report that to us. So we had to build the system that allowed that. And whether it's just an email or whatever else, they're still supposed to report it to us. Well, there's 33 delineated crimes, but not every cop's going to remember that. So we just said, anytime you lock up one of our kids, let us know, and then we'll figure it out. And that allows us to see. We also, in the meeting that I was talking about, the all hazard meeting, we host a gang intervention meeting. So I bring in all of our principals and all of our vice principals and our principals, and they sit with the local gang unit. And I challenge the local gang unit to come to the table. You got 8 people, or up to 16, 18, 20 people sitting in front of you that can give you information, right? Because our school leaders know their kids. They know who they hang out with. They know nicknames. They know all of these things. Here you are sitting in front of them to get information, but it's a two-way street. You have to give us information. Far too often, part of my career I spent in intelligence. Intelligence and narcotics and police departments and things like that, they are information suckers. So they take all of that information in, but seldom do you get anything back. And what I challenged the gang unit with was, we'll give you whatever you need, but you got to give it back to us. You've got to tell us who the players are. You've got to tell us what they're into. You've got to tell us what to look for. And they were receptive to that, because 2 years ago when we were in school, we had a gang issue, and it was in our school, so we were allowed to let the investigators into the building, and we brought them kids. So we're helping the community. We're helping our schools. Again, collaborative efforts, collaborative partnerships, to where those things work when we're sharing information. Far too often, schools sit over here. They've got these wonderful databases of great information. They can tell you that, you walk into a school and ask a vice principal, who does this kid hang out with? Oh, they hang out here. Where do they hang out with? They know everything. And in many cases, they're actually on their social media pages. Again, another outlet for the police to get involved with. That is a great example of what collaboration can bring. Myself and one of my former partners who was in charge of the gang unit in my former organization, we've presented at national conferences about how we worked together, how we shared. So they had kids that were creating videos, releasing them on YouTube that had guns in them. They could only identify about half the kids that were in the video. We showed them in the schools, and by the time we showed them at this meeting, and by the time we got done, we had named every one of the kids that was in the videos. It was amazing to listen to. Oh, that's so-and-so. That's Day-Day. That's Johnny. That's Jimmy. Oh, they go to this school, went to this school. Oh, here's their last name. And the police walked out with a notebook full of information that they didn't have over a 5-minute video. And we have to be willing to do that more often. And we have to get through this idea that schools are so siloed off, and the police are only worried about locking kids up. And the idea that what happens in a school is in a school, and what happens in a community is in a community. That's not true. They cross-section across every day. Every day.
So you were talking about, videos on social media, like, when I was in high school, social media was when you interacted with people face to face. There was no Twitter, there's no Facebook, there's no TikTok, there's none of that. Has that shifted in the way that you kind of know what's going on with the students and how to ascertain, threats to a particular school?
So it does play a role. It's not the only role. There are a number of companies out there that provide like social media monitoring for different schools or for different events. They can set up geofences and do social media. The problem with that is that usually it's only public communication. So your Facebook page is probably locked down, just like mine is. You can only see a picture or two on mine. If I'm communicating on my Facebook page and it's not set to public, or the message isn't set to public, their software can't see it. A vast majority of people know that, and a vast majority of people don't like Big Brother watching. And what we've seen is across the country with many of these things where people are posting, they're posting them in their own peer groups. They're posting on small web forums and things like that. So those social media monitoring are very limited in what they can do. Where we've went a little bit different, and we, with the help of my former superintendent, we created an intelligence unit in our school system. We're one of the few that has something like that, where we don't spend a great deal of time monitoring social media, but when we need to, we can. And when we get a tip, like we have anonymous tip lines or whatever else, we can utilize the amount of connections that we have in the community. Say, hey, are you friends? I noticed you're friends with this person. Can you go on to their page and see what you see? And a lot of times we do that with the administrators. We do that with, we try, we have rules that say that our people aren't supposed to be connected with their kids through social media, but sometimes there's a number of different reasons. And Charles County is 160,000 people. We're too big to be small and too small to be big. Everybody knows everybody. So I can connect with somebody that's a trusted source at some level somewhere that may or may not be an administrator or a teacher to get the information off the page if I need be. Social media is a great tool, but it's not the only tool in the toolbox. We have to have, as I said earlier, building relationships inside of the schools is highly important to keeping them safe. We had 2 years ago, we had 2 guns found at a school in a 6-week period. And rightfully so, the community was up in arms. Schools are unsafe and lots of things there. But the side point of that I tried to explain to people is to believe that there's not guns in schools on occasion is ridiculous. They're there. The point here is in your school, somebody brought it forward. They felt comfortable enough because of the relationships that they have built with staff, students, and the SROs that they brought that information forward. Mm-hmm. We need to have that and emulate that everywhere because kids are going to do kid things. And sadly, kids have impulse control issues. This coming school year, we are all set for tragedy. It's going to be a sporty school year and tragic at minimum. And I hope that I'm 100% wrong. But when you look at increasing gun violence across the country, that we've seen increasing mass shootings, impulse control, you can see that from road rage issues. You can see that from the way that people deal with authority, not only police-wise, but government-wise. People showing up to fight over critical race theory that's not even being discussed in board meetings, but that's creating a problem to try and get in front of something that's really not even a portion of a national discussion. People, the way, even if you just take what the FAA is saying about the number of airplane incidents and disorderly people on airplanes, to think that that's not going to come to a school is ludicrous. It's coming to our schools. Our kids have been without supports for 18 and 24 months. We're going to have a sporty year. So this year, we have to be 100% correct in order to keep all of our kids safe. That's going to include collaboration from our local partners, all of our people being up on time, up on things, people sharing information and us sharing information back out. And we've already seen it. We've seen incidents where we've had parents during summer school that just fly off the handle about a bus being early. I mean, you complain when a bus is late. Yes, I get that. But in this case, her student didn't even miss the school bus. She was just upset that the bus was early and that they got there early because of whatever reason. And she screamed at the bus driver, followed the bus driver, scared the bus driver to death, ended up at the school. Over what? It's an impulse control issue. It is obviously there's something else much larger than a bus being early, but we're the government.
Yeah. And
we are going to have those issues. So we have to be on our game as we move forward, especially moving into the school year.
So do you see, 'cause I know you talked about, kind of working with other government agencies, working with community, trying to work more with community. What are schools doing to, in a sense, work more with the kids to build that trust with the kids to, hey, I'll use whatever the phrase was when I was younger, and around 9/11, see something, say something. How's the school fostering that type of communication with the students?
So that's always the challenge, right? So any good school system, any school system that's built a high quality safety and security program, it's built on layers, right? It's not just one thing. It can never be one thing, and it can't just be technology because anytime you have a crisis and you use technology, it breaks. So you have to have those backup plans, the paper and the pens and the pencils, and being able to communicate in different ways, and having redundancy plans. But when it comes to building those relationships, there's been a set of at least 4 grants between the CARES money, and then there's been 3 versions of this ESSER money that's come out that have allowed school systems, and in many cases, given the school systems in the states more money than they can spend because they pigeonhole it. You can only use it for this, you can only use it for that. And mental health supports and wraparound services inside of schools are enormous. They are immense. And just about, I would grow to say at this point, they will be in every school district in the country. And they'll have more than what they had before. The problem is how do we get kids to those services? And in many cases, those services have existed for eons. Our school system is no different. That a vast majority of disciplinary issues and of arrests or criminal charges that result from schools happen because of assaults, because of fights. And for years, every school system in the world has concentrated on diversion programs and mediation programs and restorative practices programs to reduce the amount of altercations, but we still have them. How do we get those kids that are reluctant and only know how to fight and only know how to solve problems with impulse control issues or with physical confrontations to the services, especially when they grow when in the areas that they grow up in, maybe with the family supports or the lack of the family supports that say that stuff doesn't work, that you need to defend your honor. When we look at gun violence out here, we're not very far from DC. And when you look at some of those kids are fighting over honor, and they're shooting and killing each other over a diss or over something else. And that's been a problem for a long time. It's not new to 2021, but it has increased. It's increased greatly. And you can get into that gun control thing, but it takes somebody to pull the trigger on every gun that's out there. The gun just doesn't fire on its own. It's an impulse control issue, and it's an inability to deal with stress and inability to emotional maturity issues, things like that. So we have to concentrate on how do we get all of these wonderful services that we have and put them in the lap of our kids so that our kids are not afraid to go to them and our parents are willing to use them. We can't force kids to come to mediation. But at the same time, we want to keep kids from being arrested because we know introducing them into the criminal justice system isn't the right way to go about it in most cases. However, it's the only way government has given us a chance to respond that requires that intervention. So in Maryland, and I think in most states, the Department of Juvenile Services or the juvenile justice branch of government is a referral service. They're not a punitive service. They're there to keep kids out of the criminal justice system, but they're a part of the criminal justice system because they also have a punishment arm. Mm-hmm. So it's really confusing to advocates that, look, we've got to place charges against this kid to introduce them to the system to get them to the deferral programs that are mandated because we can hold the carrot over the stick over their head with the court. But that's probably not the right way to go about it in the 21st century. We want kids to stay away from that for the labeling issues and for everything else, the hopelessness issues that it brings. But the challenge is how do you do it built in the 21st century bureaucratic structures? And government's not designed to change. Government's not designed to quickly evolve. But the demands placed upon us to reduce the amount of kids that are being introduced are much faster. They want much faster results. So we have to look for those low-hanging fruits, those low-hanging things that we can really stop kids from being introduced to the criminal justice system with and find those wins that we can celebrate.
It sounds like ultimately it's trying to move away from a us versus them mentality and building at an earlier age an us and we mentality that, we're all in this together. We're trying to help each other as opposed to we want to punish you or we want to put you away or, you're an outsider, so to speak.
Think about it from when you were in school, right? If a kid was bad, they got suspended. And in our day, that was bad. You didn't want to get suspended. Yeah. In today's world, getting suspended isn't a big deal. But what we know is when we stop kids from having the ability to learn, even if it's for 2 days, for 3 days for physical altercation, they're 3 days behind and they never make it up.
Yeah.
And what are they doing? They're sitting at home, probably causing more consternation, if not for society, at least for the parents. Right? Yeah. And we know that it's different today than it was years ago. We know suspending a kid for wearing their earbuds isn't appropriate. It's a violation of a rule, but is it to remove and more than likely, it's probably the kid that needs to be in school the most that we're dealing with all the time. So we have to evolve. And for so many adults, as I said earlier, it's easy to teach the kids. For the adults, you see them all day long. You need to suspend that kid. You need to get rid of that kid. So what? So they can break into your house while you're at work? And then it's our problem that we suspended them. So we have to reimagine. And we've heard that quite a bit during COVID. We've heard, reimagine, all those other catchphrases. But honestly, I think that's what our charge is in the 21st century is to reimagine what that looks like. How do we build those structures to reduce discipline, to increase performance at our schools, and to build productive societal members? Because that's ultimately our goal, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's what we're really struggling with is this old school adage of those of us who are in our 40s that have kids that are in school that, the schools are out of control. The schools are out of control. They're really not. It's a small amount of kids. We just got to figure out. I'd point anybody to, I'm a voracious reader to Bill Bratton's new book called The Profession. He talks about how to reimagine policing, and it's nothing more than neighborhood policing. And those conversations that he has, you can take that and so many other books and translate them into education and criminal justice and just the amazing things that we're seeing in one side of things should never be siloed off because it was a corporate solution or because it was a policing solution or, one of my favorite authors, Stanley McChrystal, it's a special ops solution. Those solutions are across the board for all of us, and we need to take them.
Yeah. So let's shift gears a little bit here and talk about cybersecurity in schools and kind of the cyber issues that you have to deal with. I think of businesses, and it's easy to, quote unquote, easy to pull your staff into a meeting and say, here are the rules. Don't click on this. When you see this, do this. You're all professionals. We're all paying you good money. You need to follow the rules. And then try to, okay, schools are now facing the same issues, if not more issues than businesses are. And you have a bunch of kids with impulse controls to throw in the mix. How do you guys, or what are some of the cybersecurity issues that you guys are facing, and what are you doing to remedy them?
So I think we face the same cybersecurity issues that everybody faces, but you add in the kid component. So my son is an amazing young man, works in the computer industry now. And when he was in school, he's 24, 25. So that kind of tells you how long ago it was. He hacked into all of the routers in the school just to show them that it could be done. I mean, and this isn't the advent of computers or the growing of computers, but here he is taking down the firewalls and everything else because he was able to, but he did it for a good reason. We do see some nefarious trying to get into our grading system, changing grades, the things that we've all done. But we did it with an eraser.
Yeah.
So, or we just didn't get the mail that day and it shredded, whatever. But the kids are enterprising and they have a lot of time to deal with those things. We don't necessarily see as many cybersecurity issues from our kids as one would think. We see international groups, and insider threat issues, sabotage issues. That's always a concern, right? Because you can build the best network with all the different things, lock everything down. If you give somebody an email address and they click on something and it infects, that's it. It's like I was just onboarding some people this morning, some new employees this morning, and welcome to the organization. And we talked about none of you are lucky enough to have a long lost relative in Egypt that's just going to give you $2 million if you send them $750 in Green Dot cards.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen. But at the same time, while that sounds absolutely ludicrous, the reason that they're successful with it is one person does it.
Yeah.
And think about it. If you send out 20,000 emails a day, one person responds, you funded it with no work. So it works. And quite frankly, I think you could go as far as to say a vast majority of Americans have been scammed on the internet in one form or fashion or another, right? And it's embarrassing. None of us want to talk about it because we all sit back and go, oh my God, that was dumb. But it happens to the best of us. It happens to very bright people. So malware is a huge issue. Ransomware is a huge issue. We have to continue. And I think school systems in particular have been far behind on that because who wants our data? Well, it's important to us. And if you can imagine how much education we do virtually now and how many, all those other things, it shuts us down. We saw multiple school districts in last year, even in the DC area, that had to close because of their systems had been overtaken by people. Yeah. So those issues, and I really think that school systems across the country are really going to have to invest in hiring cybersecurity specialists, not just relying on network engineering, the traditional people that keep your servers running and things like that. We're really going to have to invest in corporate and government style cybersecurity solutions that are to keep us safe, because our data is valuable, and it's not valuable to anybody else but us.
Yeah. And I guess that's kind of I think business people even think, people who run a small business, why am I ever going to get targeted? My customer list isn't important to anybody. Well, but it's important to you if you don't have access to it.
Yeah. And think about how many times as an adult your credit cards have been stolen. You still have your credit card. It's still in front of you, but somebody is charged $1 to someplace in Spain to your credit card. It happens all the time. I mean, and you've done nothing wrong, but a data leak from I just had to go through and get a new credit card a while ago. It wasn't that I did anything wrong, but I firmly believe I went to a small business. I used my credit card, and that's how it was done. And it's not that it's a small business problem, because Target had the exact same issue a couple of years ago. Yeah. And believe me, everybody on the Intel side of my life, everybody's information's on the internet. You can find anybody's social security number, nothing secret anymore. You can find credit card numbers and everything else, passwords, everything. I just got something the other day from Credit Karma, I think, that said that my password had been, or my login had been stolen from a parking lot thing. And now think about, that's not a big deal that my login or my password were stolen, or that my password was stolen. But how many times do you use the same password for everything?
Yeah.
And there are people that are buying these lists on the dark web that are just matching things up. I used to run a small business, and even in 2014, 2015, I'd get 17 to 20 charges using the different credit cards, trying to send something to Cuba or trying to send something to Venezuela or whatever. And that was 7-8 years ago. And it would just be trying and trying and trying. And what they were trying was the same card number in many cases, but different CVV codes.
Yeah.
And eventually they're going to get it right. So, and people, we all think that doesn't happen, but it's lucrative, even if it's successful once.
Yeah. There's economies of scale that unfortunately work in the criminal or the cyber criminal's advantage, that it's very inexpensive to launch attacks. It's very expensive to defend against attacks.
Absolutely.
So I'm not sure if I want to ask this question, and if you don't want to answer it, we'll edit it out. And if we don't edit it out, people will hear this. It'll be kind of funny. Is there a cybersecurity equivalent of the kid pulling the fire alarm? Like when I was in school, when you didn't want the test, some kid would go run and pull the fire alarm, and so much for the test. It's going to have to happen tomorrow. It's still going to happen. But is there a cybersecurity equivalent of that you're seeing in schools that are, instead of kids pulling the fire alarms, they're doing, I don't know, something on the cybersecurity side?
At the low end, maybe taking over TVs inside of rooms with their cell phones, using the remotes, the codes for the remotes, taking over that. But on the top end of that, we are seeing huge increases in swatting. And while that's not necessarily a cybersecurity issue, it does boil down to most of the swatting revolves around gaming.
So let's for the audience, for those who don't know what swatting is, can you tell us what swatting is?
So swatting is where somebody will call in a 911 phone call for an area or a residence and identify somebody in a fake call to get the police or the fire department or somebody to respond to that fake call. In many cases, it's a hostage situation, a homicide situation, a bomb threat, or something along those lines. What we are seeing, and we've had it twice in the last couple months, is kids who play, say, Call of Duty or these first-person shooter games or something along those lines, that they get into an argument while they're playing the game. The people have information that you share as a part of the game, as a part of the relationship that you build with these people, and then they use it again. I beat you, you beat me in the game, so now I'm going to get back at you, and I'm going to call in and I'm going to say, Brian Wilson has a bomb at Westlake High School. Because when you're playing these games today, they play them on a Zoom platform like this where you can see the background, and some of these kids have their school names and they know their real names. And it doesn't take much to find Westlake High School, and they know you're in Maryland, to type that in to figure it out and to call the school. And So whether it's a homicide, we most of ours have been bomb threat situations where, this kid's got a bomb in his backpack. You better get out of the school. Traditional fire alarms, bomb threats were usually done, on the first 70-degree day when there's a test the next day and there's a carnival right outside of school and the kids don't want to be in school, right? And we've learned from that. Our school system, we respond, but we do not evacuate schools for that. Which by doing that, we cut all that out.
Yeah.
Now we're seeing the same thing happen with swatting. And it's becoming an increasing issue. And it's always one of the first questions that I ask when we have one of these threats. Where did numbers come from? What did they say? And when we talk to the suspect that may have been identified, tell me about the video games you play. Who have you had problems with in the video games? And we are finding that to be the much broader issue versus a kid turning off or on and a television or, because most of our grade books are done over. We have had, like I said earlier, we've had issues with kids trying to break into our school management, records management systems, but those things are pretty easy to spot once they get done because the kids, those are running tallies. You just can't change the last grade to a D. I teach at a couple of colleges and those are running tablets. I mean, unless you change every one of those grades, you just can't change the last one to show up as a D. You got to change them all.
And the teachers are pretty well aware of Johnny was failing. Why does he have an A on his report card? That's not
exactly.
I think Johnny needs to focus his energies on computer science.
But then again, we also fight the problem as we talk about cybersecurity. Teachers who write down on a Post-it note their password and stick it to their computer in their classroom. Because they're just not, teachers are amazing creatures. They are amazing human beings. They do this job for amazing things, and it isn't because of the love of the money. But they don't necessarily see, oh, that's my password. Let me write that down. And because they don't view the world that way. They don't view the world like you and I or police officers or people who do this that kind of look, at all the threats that are out there and make our determinations. Teachers just don't do that. Their kids would never do that. That's why they're teachers.
Yeah. So I think we originally thought we would talk a little bit about COVID, and so let's just 2 minutes on COVID in terms of kind of some of the challenges that you have in bringing kids back and community and those sort of things.
So it's a never-ending challenge. Education's built on pretty bright lines and solid foundations of this is what's possible. This is what we can do legally. These are the things that we can do. And COVID has shown us that is just unsustainable and it's an untenable position. So we have to be nimble. The best advice that I can give anybody is to include parents, communities as a whole, and school administration and everything else is remain nimble and remain open. As we sit here today on the 26th of July, on the 1st of July, we implemented a mask optional policy inside of our schools. So you could wear a mask. We strongly encourage you to wear a mask. But it was optional for everybody from the unvaccinated to the vaccinated. And on July 1st, we were in the right spot. We were at 0.56% locally positivity rate. Our cases per 100,000 were below 1 per 100,000. So we were in the right spot. However, 25 days later, we are at 3.27% in 6 cases per 100,000. So we've seen 6-fold increases in 25 days. So we have to change, and we will change. And I think far too often my phone has been ringing off the hook while we've been sitting here. My emails are blowing up. I got reporters and everything else, and they all want to know what we're doing for COVID. Well, quite frankly, we're 24 days, 30 days away from opening school here. And we don't know where we're going to be tomorrow, let alone where we're going to be 30 days from now, but people want answers. But we're talking about their babies, and they're scared, and they want to know what we're doing, and they want to know that we are being protective. And no matter what we've done, one of the things that I struggle with the most is I think we have built, as far as our units, we've built a tremendous amount of legitimacy and credibility because we've done what we said we were going to do. But there's still people that are questioning it because it's government. And to continue to tell people, look, we will take care of your kids. There is no good business sense for allowing kids to come to school unsafe. This just doesn't make sense. And it is difficult for parents to understand that. It's difficult for teachers to understand that. But the best advice that I can say to anybody is stay flexible, stay nimble, pay attention to what's going on locally. What happens in Arkansas does not affect you unless you live in Arkansas. Stay local with what's going on and understand that with COVID, you can find anybody to agree with your statements.
Yep.
And if you're using the Daily Wire and Mother Jones to justify your belief in COVID, there's something wrong. And the CDC writes policy for the nation, not for your states, not for your locality. So, of course, when the CDC says something, they say it for the nation. As we see right now, the nation's very divided in where we sit. Coming back from Bexar County, Texas, it was 13.75% positivity. They got a lot more COVID community-wise than what we do in Charles County, but we're trying to be proactive, right? So stay connected with what's going on local. Stay connected with what's going on from the CDC. Stay connected with what's going on from your local health departments, from your regional health departments, and from your local guiding bodies, because that's where the importance comes from. People get wrapped up in the misinformation and the politics of things, and much of my day is involving that and fighting that. But at the end of the day, it makes no good business sense to send kids back to school when they're not safe. And these are our national treasures. So we need to do everything that we can to protect them, but we need to do everything that we can to protect them within reason. And it's written, and that is justified by science, and even science that we don't agree with. So you can't just scream that you're about science when you like it.
Yeah, that is a challenge. And it's unfortunate that it's been a very, regardless of what side people are on, it's unfortunate that it's been a very polarizing discussion, and it makes it very hard to implement policy and to have kind of this consensus of like, hey, this is how we're going to march forward without a large portion of a community being upset one way or the other.
And, I think one of the striking points to me, and this is not an original thought by me, but one of the striking points that was brought to my attention that I think is that I think every adult should think about. If today was the 1920s, 30s, and 40s when we were fighting mumps and measles and polio and smallpox and everything else, and we created these wonderful vaccines that basically eradicated those diseases and those viruses. If we took that and transported it into 2021, we never would have eradicated any of them. And think about that. And much of that is because parents, adults, don't know what it's like to look at somebody who's been inflicted with polio. They don't know what it looked like to lose somebody to smallpox, to lose somebody to measles or to mumps, because it's never been around. In our lifetime, we've never seen that.
Yeah.
So now you complicate this with COVID, and you see this idea that 52% of the country will not be vaccinated with a very safe vaccine, and all of the misinformation that goes with it. And then you wonder, would we have eradicated polio if it was today? And the answer, I think, is no. And I think science proves it. I think data proves it. And that scares me. Mm-hmm. And it should scare all of us at the fact that there's 168 million Americans that have been fully vaccinated. They're safe. The statistics that are out there, people dying from the vaccine, are made up. They're not real. They are safe. And locally, we're at 38% from 12 to 17. That's non-tenable to open schools and to maintain schools being open without masks. You don't want to wear a mask because you think it infringes upon your rights? Get your kid vaccinated. Because that's the way we're going to get through this. It scares me. It scares me to death to think of, and it's just like everything else. What is old is new again.
Yeah. Is there I seem to remember this, and I don't know if it's an urban legend, so don't hold me to the science of this, but I heard there were, in the same way we were talking earlier about the cybersecurity equivalent of pulling the fire alarm, I've heard that there are some equivalents of kind of pulling the COVID alarm in terms of kids finding ways to test positive when they're not positive in order to, have quarantines to keep them out of tests. Is that something that you guys are looking at and having to deal with?
No, I mean, not as of right now, because we've had virtual or hybrid instruction. So if we had a child that was in face to face, so the way that we set things up is if you were in face to face, you were in face to face. If you were in virtual, you were in virtual. You couldn't go back and forth. However, kids were enterprising, and what they did figure out was the idea that I'm sick today. You don't want me to come to school sick, which is one of our rules. You don't come to school sick, so I'm going to stay home. And that's the same day that the test goes. Yeah. So not as much about being quarantined as much about enterprising children figuring out a way to game the system. And all their face-to-face friends are all sitting in the classroom doing this. They're all sitting in the classroom doing this with two monitors up, one for the teacher to watch them, the other monitor for them to be Googling the answer. That's where we saw that. Now that will go away this year, because as it sits today, we are our virtual. We don't have a virtual option, so kids can't opt in or opt out as it sits today. I don't think we saw anybody who feigned being sick. The way that our school district did things was also a little bit different as far as contact tracing. Our unit did all of our own contact tracing. So we contact traced 277 adults, staff members over the period of COVID. When we started in October all the way through. And then we contact traced 66 kids when we went back to school in March. So we did all of those interviews with the parents. We did while we didn't demand people to send us proof of positive tests. I never found anybody that was lying about being with COVID, because that's just not. I just never found anybody go to that stretch. It was too easy to do other things.
Yeah, yeah, that's the good point. It's easier for kids to do other ways to disrupt the flow. Mm-hmm. So before we wrap up today, any other advice for kind of school safety, school security that should be on the top of people's minds?
Build layers upon layers upon layers. And when you start to look at layers, it's not just about physical security. It's not just about having cool technological things. It's also about pens and paper. It's also about relationships, and it's also about mental health. School security is based upon school climate. The safest way that you can make schools is through school climates. Positive school climates is the safest way that you can make sure that we are as safe as possible. And those require relationships, and that requires investment. It requires collaboration. Build on layers. It's not just, there's no silver bullet. If there was, we all would have it by now.
Yep.
And it is all truly about building upon layers.
Awesome. Jason, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. We really appreciate your expertise.
Thank you. I appreciate it's been an honor.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Easy Pray podcast. If you found something about this episode actionable or noteworthy, share a comment by leaving a review at easypray.com/review. Notes and a transcript of this episode with Jason Stoddard can be found at easypray.com/78.